Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a truly fascinating analysis from the FEM Technology Intelligence Suite. It tackles a massive, hidden inefficiency in global finance, specifically, how the life and health insurance industry fundamentally misprices women's health. Now, why should you care? Well, whether you're an insurer, a healthcare provider, or, honestly, just a patient, this trillion-dollar blind spot affects the exact care you receive and the premiums you pay. We're going to look at how systemic clinical failures are mathematically disguised as unalterable biological realities.
Here's our roadmap for today's explainer. We're covering the actuarial illusion, system waste versus biology, the cardiometabolic blind spot, decomposing the claims data, the reinsurers superpower, and finally, the actuarial agenda. Let's jump right in.
Part 1. The actuarial illusion, or uncovering the mathematical measurement error.
So, for decades, actuarial tables have treated sex as this blunt demographic variable. The basic assumption? Women just inherently have higher health risks. But here's where it gets absolutely wild. Reinsurers are currently staring at a 2.1 trillion, yes, trillion with a T, global premium opportunity tied to achieving gender parity over the next decade. Yet, they're trying to capture this massive market using algorithms that disguise systemic clinical failures as unalterable biological realities. The industry assumes that using sex as a proxy for higher risk is biologically accurate, but in reality, it's a massive mathematical measurement error. Think of it like paying for a structural defect in a building instead of just fixing the foundation. Charging women higher premiums for excess morbidity, which really just means higher rates of disease and medical issues, is effectively pricing in the medical system's own inefficiency. Imagine a cardiac event is missed in a 45-year-old woman, simply because her diagnostic tests didn't hit a male-calibrated threshold. Because of that miss, the insurer eventually pays for a massive, catastrophic surgical intervention a whole decade later. The actuary sees that high cost, blames the female demographic segment, and boom, raises the premium. They are literally paying for a structural defect, not a biological destiny.
Which brings us to Part 2, System Waste versus Biology, and tracing these clinical deficits.
To really understand these deficits, we have to look at how our medical evidence base was built in the first place. The parity deficits in the IQVIA 2025 trial data are absolutely staggering. Notice the gap in Alzheimer's disease. It has a 67% female prevalence, yet women make up only 40% of pivotal trial enrollments. Or take cardiovascular disease. Women share about 52% of the disease burden, but represent only around 38% of trial participants. The downstream effect of this is entirely predictable. Standard therapies and diagnostic thresholds are actually calibrated on a male baseline, which inevitably leads to higher claims due to misdiagnoses and delayed care for women. And then we have the administrative side of things, which builds into what we call administrative erasure. Imagine a woman is treated for gestational diabetes during pregnancy. Her records use specific obstetric codes to mark this, but upon discharge, when her care transitions from obstetrics to a primary care doctor, that highly specific obstetric code is basically erased. It gets swapped out into a generic type 2 diabetes or abnormal glucose billing code. The system literally loses her crucial historical marker. That distinct metabolic risk signal just vanishes into generic paperwork, completely blinding the insurer to the patient's actual risk trajectory.
Now for Part 3, the cardiometabolic blind spot. This is what happens when protocols actually do harm.
Cardiovascular risk calculators form the absolute bedrock of life and health underwriting, but they contain glaring, frankly dangerous gaps when applied to female policyholders. Just look at this. The 2025 Reboot trial revealed that standard beta blockers, which have been the go-to post-heart attack protocol for 4 decades, actually increase the risk of death, myocardial infarction, or heart failure in women by an astounding 45%, and this is in patients with preserved heart function, meaning their heart is still pumping normally. No adverse effect was observed in men. Current underwriting assumes these women are receiving risk-reducing treatment, but the standard protocol is actively harming them.
Furthermore, we have the preeclampsia blind spot. Women who experience hypertensive disorders of pregnancy, like preeclampsia, face a massive 4-fold increased risk of future heart failure, 4 times the risk. Yet, standard cardiovascular calculators like Framingham make this vital history completely invisible to the actuary. When a 45-year-old woman applies for life insurance, the algorithm simply doesn't weigh her pregnancy history, entirely missing a golden 10-year intervention window. By ignoring this, the industry is essentially choosing to just sit around and wait for a massive, catastrophic claim rather than preventing it.
Moving on to Part 4, decomposing the claims data and isolating the unpriced variables. Once we recognize that these excess claims aren't just some biological monolith, we can fundamentally change how we underwrite. We can actually break down that traditional actuarial loading factor. It isn't some inelastic, unalterable biological destiny. It actually consists of predictable, correctable clinical failures. We're talking about specific attributable pathway failures, pharmacokinetic overdosing, cardiovascular risk score miscalibration, the surveillance gap following hypertensive disorders of pregnancy, and fragmented menopause care. These are all measurable variables.
Let's look at one of the most impactful ones on that list, pharmacokinetic overdosing. Now, pharmacokinetics is basically just the study of how differently a body absorbs, distributes, and clears medication. Well, it turns out equal dose prescribing overmedicates women by design on 76 out of 86 FDA-approved drugs analyzed in a recent review. Because women often have elevated blood concentrations and longer elimination times for these medications, equal doses lead to a massive volume of adverse reaction claims. These claims are generated purely from bad prescribing at the clinical interface, not from any inherent biological vulnerability.
This brings us to Part 5, the Reinsurers' Superpower, fixing the pathway with treaty conditions.
So how do we actually fix this? Primary insurers often hesitate to pay for upstream preventative care because they fear the patient might just switch insurance carriers before the investment pays off. It's a concept known in the industry as member churn. But reinsurers, they have a superpower, the treaty condition. They have the long-term time horizon and the financial leverage to negotiate a discounted rate for a primary insurer if that insurer mandates specific sex-calibrated care protocols. It's a simple four-step process for something like preeclampsia. First, assess the arithmetic risk, that known 4x multiplier. Second, observe that the primary insurer is currently doing nothing. Third, intervene by offering a lower rate for mandated monitoring. And fourth, achieve the return on intervention.
And this is where the return on intervention becomes absolutely undeniable. You spend $5,000 on structured surveillance over a 10-year period. In doing so, you proactively intercept and prevent a $200,000 catastrophic early onset stroke claim a decade down the line. That is a 40x return on intervention. It actively shifts the reinsurance book toward favorable, highly profitable selection.
Finally, Part 6, the Actuarial Agenda, a roadmap for integration.
How does the industry practically stop blindly absorbing this systemic waste and actually start preventing it? Well, it doesn't require ripping up the floorboards all at once. The FEM Technology Intelligence Suite lays out this highly practical, de-risked commercial roadmap. You can start right at Tier 0 with a published evidence audit. This maps known clinical failures directly to current underwriting manuals, no internal claims data required at all. Then, in Tier 1, you move to retrospective claims decomposition to prove historical costs. Tier 2 is the actual algorithmic integration and treaty design. Finally, reaching Tier 3 is the ultimate goal, launching net new, sex-calibrated products that actually capture that multi-trillion-dollar market. As we map out these structural frameworks embedded in healthcare economics today, I want to leave you with a question that every healthcare professional and insurer really needs to reflect on. What risk are we actually choosing to underwrite? Are we pricing biological risk, or are we just pricing clinical failure? By separating system waste from true biological risk, we can finally stop charging women for the medical system's blind spots and force the healthcare apparatus to operate with precision. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I highly encourage you to look deeper into the clinical data shaping our financial models.